got the world on my shoulders, and the air's getting colder. I'm marching on like a soldier. There's no stopping now.
This is the 18th Airborne Corps podcast, the official podcast of the United States military. Coming to you from the center of the military universe, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, with your host, Joe Bacino.
Hey folks, Joe Bacino here, your traditional host of the 18th Airborne Corps podcast, the official podcast of the U.S. military. Today, joined by a friend. Hello, friend.
Hello, friend.
Hey. Why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Colonel Scott Pence, the garrison commander at Fort Bragg.
And you've been on the show before. It was episode 57. It was about renaming Fort Bragg. We released this in September.
One of the best.
And now you're back on. Today we're talking about an issue that, as we are discussing here off air, that's been in the national news. It's gaining coverage in the national news over the past month, probably because of the holiday season and because of the inflation issue that's in the news. But it is a serious issue. And it's perhaps an issue that was maybe a little bit of a hidden crisis until now. Now it's gaining some media coverage. And so we're talking about the issue of military food insecurity.
That's right. And with the inflationary pressures, the problem is exacerbated.
Between the flags, parades, and cookouts, Americans are used to showing their patriotism on Memorial Day. But experts and advocates say this holiday, many of the nation's troops need more than a salute. They need food. Food insecurity has skyrocketed through the pandemic for many Americans, but it's been an issue long before COVID for many military families. Some advocates and lawmakers are hoping to change that.
Tens of thousands of active duty military service members are having trouble feeding their families. Families are either going hungry or some are at risk of going hungry. And Scott, I have a couple of estimates here. You know, part of the problem is the exact scope of this is not really understood because there's never been a formal study on this. But we do know it's a problem, and I have a couple of data points here. So there's one estimate by Feeding America. Feeding America is a Chicago-based nonprofit that coordinates the work of hundreds of food banks across the country. Their estimate is roughly 160,000 active duty service members struggle to feed their families. So that's one data point. There's another survey I'm looking at on my laptop right now. This is Blue Star Families. So they do an annual survey. It's called the Military Family Lifestyle Survey. For about a month in 2020, they spoke with almost 11,000 folks, 11,000 respondents, and 14% of the respondents, these are active duty service members, report that they struggle to feed their families. So there's that. And then finally, Scott, is Military Family Advisory Network, a nonprofit, estimates that before COVID, 1 in 8 military families struggled to put food on the table. Today, that number is 1 in 5. So, you know, we know it's a problem and it's been a problem. So what are you seeing in terms of the size of this problem on Fort Bragg?
Right, and as you mentioned, it is hard to measure. There's a stigma attached. There's not reporting methods that are very refined to gather this information. We've had surveys. We've asked commanders, is this a problem? We haven't had the fidelity on the information that we have on other issues. That being said, clearly in the nation, there are indicators that it's a problem nationwide. Inflationary pressures, grocery bills are getting higher. Naturally, we expect people are going to have a harder time making ends meet. But some of the news reports on active duty service members, they sometimes conflate people who live in very high-income areas like San Diego and Fort Lewis, Washington, near Seattle. And they sometimes conflate the issues that those soldiers or service members are dealing with, and they think that it's going on throughout the country. Mm-hmm. And the problems of San Diego and Seattle are very different from the problems from Fayetteville.
Okay. Those are, I think, some of the most expensive cities to live in the country.
Right.
So different set of pressures.
But that being said, you cannot ignore that there is a problem. You've got to make sure that you have all the resources available so that chains of command can take care of their soldiers. And that's what we're all about. From the Chief of Staff of the Army on down, it's about people first and attracting, retaining, and making sure we have the best talent who want to stay in the U.S. Army.
It is an issue of concern, Scott. The Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, the man in charge of the entire United States military, made a public statement on this issue last month.
made financial struggles even tougher. With the holidays approaching, I know that this is on the minds of our military communities, and it's certainly top of mind for me. So today I've directed the department to take several steps to strengthen the economic security of our force. First, we're providing some immediate relief. The Department of Defense has temporarily raised the basic allowance for housing in areas that have had a 10% increase in rental costs this year. And in places with housing shortages, we're extending temporary lodging expense reimbursements so that families have more time to find a home that fits their needs. And when it comes to making sure our people have enough to eat, we've created a new toolkit that will help leaders identify service members who are struggling and connect service members and their families to resources and support programs and more. I've also directed the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness to develop a strategy and implementation roadmap within 90 days to strengthen food security across the force.
What Secretary Austin has done is both commissioned a study to better understand what's going on with this problem, and he also provided tools for all of us to help identify when there's a food insecurity in our formation, and that we didn't have that before. So it's an exciting time. And there are also resources on post that all soldiers and leaders should know about. The first one is Army Emergency Relief, and within that office, in the Soldier Support Office, in the Soldier Support Center, there is also financial readiness training that can be done to help relieve the budget. But a lot of times it's not about the budget. It's about car repairs that are much more expensive than people thought, or
Things that come up in life.
family emergencies
Okay.
that happen across all ranks, and it forces people into a situation where for a month, 2 months, maybe 3 months, they can't make ends meet.
Okay.
What we get from the great Armed Services YMCA, which is right on post, right in the mule barns, they have a food pantry there. And Jeremy Hester, the director, tells me, he said, there's people, they'll come for 1 or 2 months, they'll get groceries because they can't afford groceries that month. And then they volunteer and give back for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
So we're looking at momentary, episodic food insecurity that we have the resources on post to make sure we're dealing with appropriately.
And it seems like the real problem is among junior level enlisted ranks with children. So E1 through E4, which is like private through specialist with small children. Now, it's not exclusive to them, but that's really where we're seeing this problem.
That's right. And we have more people entering the military as breadwinners with a family than we have in past decades. We have more soldiers entering the family already with a family. So they're at the entry-level positions in the military, and some things are systemic, and the way the Army was built wasn't necessarily built to give a paycheck to really go as far as a family needs. And you can see in some of the policies that are coming from the Secretary of Defense and the Army, ways of addressing that. The news that for areas in which the rental prices have gone up more than 10%, they're going to up the BAH 10% to account for some of these issues that we're seeing across the country.
You and I spoke about this last year, that part of the problem we had on Fort Bragg last year is when COVID hit, some of our families went from dual income to single income. So we had spouses who, with the great shutdown, lost their jobs, lost their ability to earn money for their family. And so if you're reliant on that second income, that really does hurt.
Completely. When you're doing month to month and you're balancing your budget and you're investing and you're saving with 2 incomes, and suddenly that gets cut in half by one person no longer working, then you're going to have a period of time where you're reconfiguring. If you have small children, kids in elementary school, and you go to remote schooling, you can't have both parents continue to work unless you want to invest in a full-time nanny, which is very expensive. So the fact that Dodea schools in Fort Bragg and the surrounding counties are in-person schooling and they have no plans of going back to remote schooling gives a lot of reassurance to these families who may want to have their spouse go back into the workforce that they can do that now.
And now as we're coming out of COVID, the corollary is inflation. So food costs more, prices in general have gone up. Obviously, everybody wants to provide for their family on Christmas and have a great Christmas, have a great holiday. And so now you've got a different stressor.
It is. And there are some things that the Army systemically provides. One, the commissary, where you reach the lowest possible price. You're basically buying your groceries at cost when you shop at the commissary. And the PX, where you're shopping without taxes, helps with the pocketbook. And then also we have employment readiness programs. You have a priority placement program. If you're a spouse or a dependent on an Army installation, you have priority placement at any place on Fort Bragg. If you want to work at AFES, you want to work at MWR in the gyms or be a lifeguard, or if you want to become a DA civilian, if you're a spouse and dependent, you have priority placement for those jobs.
There's a statement by the Sergeant Major of the Army, Michael Grinston, in a public forum where he basically alluded to that a large part of this problem, or some of the problem, is a lack of understanding of financial management. And so I think for some people, they took it that he was stigmatizing soldiers. That's not the case. That wasn't what he was doing. He was acknowledging that leaders need to do a better job in terms of financial readiness, financial management, informing and leading, intrusive leadership, leading our soldiers through there, showing them where to go for financial readiness classes. And I know you have those resources available on Fort Bragg.
That's exactly right. No infantry squad leader is an accountant in his spare time, or he's not a financial manager, an expert like that. So what the garrison provides is our Army Community Services, which provide financial readiness training. They're on the second and third floor of the Soldier Support Center. It's the AER office, Army Emergency Relief. But some people don't need emergency relief. Some people don't need grants and loans per se. They just need to learn to better manage their funds. Mm-hmm. That being said, there's no evidence that the food insecurity problem is a problem of people doing their budget wrong. Soldiers aren't making bad budget decisions, and that's causing their food insecurity. The food insecurity is caused by broad, global economic factors.
Okay, good. And so you mentioned Secretary Austin, and I do want to mention here, some good news. Last month, November 2021, our Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, former Army general who commanded 18th Airborne Corps.
Yes.
He announced a series of steps across the military to address this situation, and I just want to go through a few of them. One, you alluded to this, a toolkit of resources. I don't think we know exactly what that's going to look like yet, but bottom line is resources. Some of it, I imagine, is going to be information.
I got a preview of it,
Okay.
And it's a very good guide, speaking about that infantry squad leader,
Yeah.
where he or she can better look at the soldiers under his care or her care and determine, have a set amount of questions that go into counseling to help get at, is this soldier's family struggling with food insecurity? And we never had that before, so that's a huge advantage.
Another idea in there is to possibly extend assignments both overseas and within the U.S. to avoid unnecessary moves.
Right.
I guess the thinking is those moves are so disruptive on incomes. I'm not sure I understand that one.
For those of us who've been in the Army for a long time, a PCS is relatively easy, but it's a big shock for the younger soldiers and younger officers. And also, it's a big shock if your spouse desires to work. It's hard to uproot them from that job. So keeping someplace longer allows the spouse in the relationship to be on the economy, advance in his or her field, and be stable enough to gain those certifications or those experiences in their job that's going to allow them to advance.
One other idea announced within this series of steps is the possibility for a 10% increase in basic housing allowance toward places with a 10% or more increase in rental costs. So this points to the problem you discussed about inflation.
That's right. And it's great to see the Department of Defense. This is a very quick reaction to the economic conditions here. I would never have expected within the year of seeing these inflationary pressures for the Department of Defense to come around this quickly with solutions like this.
And so we have that. The Secretary of Defense and the Department of Defense is working on this problem. The White House is working on this problem. So we had a visit from this group here a few weeks ago. There's a program that's run by the First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden. It's called Joining Forces. Joining Forces is a White House initiative to support military families. The principle behind it, Scott, is that military life can be unpredictable on spouses and children. And the program, which is run by a Blue Star mom, Dr. Biden, looks to address some of that unpredictability. Now, it primarily focuses on employment for military spouses, but the program is addressing this issue of food insecurity. And I know they've met with your team a few weeks ago.
That's right. And spouse employment is so important. And for those who are not back into the workforce just yet, it's a great time to take advantage of some of the other Army programs that are available. There's at the Education Center in Fort Bragg, each active duty or dependent is eligible for up to $4,000 of grant money that just goes if you want to get a certification, whether that's as a fitness instructor, as an accountant, or in some kind of cyber field. That's up to $4,000 for any certification. For spouses who are looking for employment but don't feel they have the right certifications, that's there to get them off their feet.
Okay, and I think really to make sure that we kind of close this out with a full understanding here, all of the assets and resources you talked about on Fort Bragg, USO, YMCA, Army Emergency Relief, they exist on every Army installation. We just have you on kind of representing this problem locally.
That's exactly right. Each installation has these resources. If I could just talk about how we're laid out at Fort Bragg, it is very empathetic because there's sometimes a stigma with seeking help. So at the Financial Readiness Center and Army Emergency Relief, it's built in the Soldier Support Center for a reason, and that's for the anonymity. You could be going to Soldier Support Center for ID card, you can be going there for any type of reason. You can go in there and then come out with solutions and grants and loans without anybody else knowing why you're in there. And then same thing with the Armed Services YMCA. It's built in there with our Fort Bragg Mule Barns, right by the DA photo where people go to, right by the Airborne Attic. You can go there and get groceries, bring it to your car without anybody ever seeing you. So there's no stigma attached, but families are helped.
And for leaders that are listening to this show, I'd just ask you consider to go to the Military One Source website, militaryonesource.com, and look at the Leader Toolkit. There's a lot of great information and resources there for you to check on your soldiers and provide to your soldiers. For anybody listening, there's also the Military One Source phone number, 800-342-9647, and of course, all the resources available on your installation.
Exactly right. And those resources for junior leaders and leaders who want to help their soldiers, Military One Source is the one-stop shopping for that, and it wasn't there before. So it's something that if you are a leader and you care about soldiers, you should check it out.
Well, I think anything else we need to cover here? I think we got.
Thanks, Joe.
Well, thanks for coming on the show. Thanks also for lending me your Army PT jacket. Still can't find
That's
mine.
right. I'll need that back.
We'll get it back to you. All right, thanks, Scott.
Come on, yeah. Who's got the power now?